Let's talk to Zim. Zim, who's calling in from Virginia. Zim, you're live on Truth Wanted.
Hi, Zim.
Hi. Hey, what's up, guys? So I actually had a question. I should mention I'm a medical student, and obviously I'm a big proponent of evolution and things like that, and I understand it pretty well. And I have a background in research and blah, 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 whatever. However, now I have nephews and nieces who are really young, and like between the ages of 7 and 12 or so, and I'm trying to explain to them concepts of like evolution or concepts of like speciation or so on and so on. And I'm just wondering specifically if you could make a video kind of outlining like at a kid level what this could be, but also like how would you go about approaching like this topic, especially when there are some concepts of like evolution that maybe I don't fully understand, and I have to tell them like, hey, I don't actually know this. And then, that might lead to, well, then that supports the alternative theory, which is like creationism or things like that, which have much less, or I would say no evidence to support.
Yeah. So I, first of all, you asked if I would make a video or whatever. I haven't told anybody about this yet. So don't tell anybody. It's a secret.
This is a Truth Wanted. Oh, it's an exclusive. We got an exclusive.
I'm working on something. It's a little mini series on my YouTube channel. Shameless self plug. It'll be later though, so don't hold your breath. Give me a couple of weeks. I'm doing things, but don't tell anybody. So,
your Jack and Jane series, that one was really good.
Did you? I love that. That was a fun one. Oh my God. But yeah, so I'm working on that eventually. But as for right now, this is actually something that I use in that series, and this is something that I use in anytime I'm talking about like intro bio with especially like high schoolers or even younger. If they can understand what DNA is, then they can understand neo-Darwinian evolution, which is just saying that natural selection and traits and alleles work together. So here's all you have to know to understand evolution at a kid level, at a high school level, at an early college level. If you want to get evolution, here's all it is. 3 basic things. Number 1 is that DNA exists. We have to agree. Okay, DNA controls most of the things about your body. You're a medical student. You know how not true that is a lot of the time, but whatever, it's good enough. And so you have use DNA. DNA is broken up in little chunks called genes. Each gene codes for a different thing, and you get these genes from your parents. If we can understand that, we can understand evolution. Number 2 is that there are different versions of these genes, what we call alleles. So there's not just one gene for having a hair color. There's a brown allele, and there's a black allele, and there's a blonde allele, and there's a red allele. So there's these different versions of these genes, and you can get all sorts of different kinds of them. Sometimes your parents give you 2 different alleles at the same time. Sometimes they just give you 1. It totally depends on everybody's different circumstances. If you can understand that different types of genes exist, you can understand evolution. And then finally, number 3 is that different alleles are better suited for life in different environments. So if you have all the best alleles for living in the jungle, that's great. You're going to die in the desert. And if you have all the best alleles for living in the Arctic, you're going to die in England, right? And so if you have the right alleles, you're going to live. And what's going to happen when you live? Well, you're going to have babies, and you're going to pass on those same good alleles in that environment. And if you have the wrong alleles, you're not going to have any kids, and you're not going to pass those alleles along. Or even if you do have kids, you're not going to have as many, and they're not going to have as many because they have the same poopy alleles as well. And so over time, the best alleles for whatever environment you're in are going to stick around. And the worst ones for whatever environment you're in are going to go away. And so the best possible penguin is not going to make it here on the plains in North America. And the best possible jaguar isn't going to make it out in the outback in Australia because they have the best alleles for where they live. They meet the requirement of their environment. But everybody else doesn't have that. And they don't have what everybody else has either. And so at this point, you can break down into niches and into, selection pressures and all those things if you want to. But really, if you can understand those 3 basic axioms, genes exist, they come in different flavors, and certain kinds are better for life in certain environments, you can understand evolution. And I think that's how I would break it down for kids those ages.
There you go.
Okay, that's actually, that's perfect. The only other question I would have would be in relation to, I guess, explaining concepts like speciation. Especially, the concept, the one I typically like to give is like, you have these two animals, they live in this, I don't pick an animal, I usually pick frog or something, right? You have these two frogs, they live in the same place, and gradually over time, one group of frogs go to one slightly further away location, one goes to a slightly different location. And then, over time, they kind of adapt to their environment or whatever. However, that doesn't seem to like hit home. Do you have any good examples for speciation of like, obviously we're not going to observe we may to some extent, but like we won't directly observe speciation per se in our lifetime, but do you have any good examples of what that would be like?
So what you described there with the frogs going off into a different environment and adapting to that new environment, that would be like allopatric speciation. Have something totally different. And there can also be sympatric speciation, where they speciate within the same environment under different pressures. You could have like niche partitioning there, where they live in different areas of the same swamp, and they have different little mini niches there, and so their fundamental niche is different than the realized niche, and all these fancy terminology. The thing that I would break down is that, and because this is tough concept, but it's really important, and if you can get it early, it's helpful, is just remind these kids that the word species doesn't really mean much. It's just a way that we categorize things, and there isn't actually one set definition for what a species is. And so when we see things adapting over the course of generations, that is evolution. Remember, the definition of evolution is any change in the heritable traits of a population from one generation to the next. Populations evolve, individuals don't. And we're talking about any change in any heritable trait. So if the allele frequency changes, that is evolution. So when you talk about like your example here of allopatric speciation, it's very easy to see. There's a bunch of turtles living in the plain, and then mountains get driven up in the middle by an earthquake, and now all of a sudden these turtles are in a desert and these turtles are in a marshland, and now they switch up a little bit. That's easy to understand. But when people talk about speciation, it's really important to remind them that we're drawing those lines absolutely arbitrarily. And if you say, well, if they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, then they're the same species, sure, that's the biological species concept, not law, not theory, not definition, the concept. So the biological species concept, that's the case. By the phylogenetic species concept, by the Hanesian species concept, by the ecological species concept, by the fossil species, by all these other species concept, might have a different story. And how are you going to tell me that these two dinosaurs couldn't reproduce to produce fertile offspring? How are you going to prove that? So it's really important to point out that that's the whole thing with biology. Every single definition is kind of wiggly, and don't worry so much about when can we say this is officially a new species. Just notice the gradients, notice the pattern. What I like to do is show a gradient of like red fading into blue and say, okay, point where it starts being red. You can't do it. And that's how it is as a species. If you had every single skeleton from me back to Ardipithecus ramidus, you couldn't say there's a human. It's just, it's a slow change.
But Forrest, like talking about dinosaurs, there's people that are like, dinosaurs can't be real because look at those things. How do they have sex? Like, it doesn't even make sense. That's what they'll point to. I have heard people say that. I just FYI.
That's incredibly rough.
I know. Yeah. It puts unpleasant images in the mind. But I can't add anything else to that. Forrest just covered everything, Zim. So I hope you don't have any more questions, because man, I think he gave a fantastic answer.
Well, thank you.
I don't. Yeah, that was perfect.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Well,
I hope that's helpful, man.
Thanks so much for calling, and appreciate you giving your questions. And we still got two more callers. He loves teaching. That's why he's here. We got two more callers. So real quick, I just want to remind you folks that we're going to be in the after show on the Atheist Community of Discord. So tune into that if you're interested. And that's just a chance to talk to us kind of off air, ask us some more questions, ask us how we thought about the show, stuff like that. So do that if you haven't already. And I also want to remind you guys of the Facebook fan group that you can join. There is a Truth Wanted Facebook fan group where you can talk to other people who like the show and just talk about stuff that we don't always get to, or maybe stuff you want to see on the show. I see posts about that too, which is cool. So thanks to everybody that is already in that group.